r/AmItheAsshole for calling the cops when my prodigal brother came back. #Chunk1. The moment I saw his car pull into Dad's driveway, I felt my entire body go rigid. It was a silver BMW, expensive, pristine, exactly the kind of car that someone who'd stolen $15,000 and their mother's jewelry collection could afford. I was standing in Dad's kitchen, holding a platter of hamburger buns, when my cousin Sarah squealed from the living room window. "Oh my God, is that Marcus?" 3 years. 3 years since my brother had vanished like smoke, leaving behind a void that never really closed. 3 years since I'd stood in a funeral home choosing a casket while my father sat catatonic in a chair beside me, and Marcus was nowhere to be found. I set the buns down very carefully on the counter. Through the kitchen window, I watched him emerge from that car like he was the star of some coming home movie montage. He looked good, tanned, fit, designer sunglasses pushing back his dark hair. He was wearing the kind of casual linen shirt that costs more than my weekly grocery budget. He paused for a moment before heading toward the backyard, and I swear I saw him take a breath like he was steeling himself for a performance. That's when I realized he knew what he'd done was wrong. He was just hoping we'd all forgotten. "Is he?" My dad's voice came from behind me, barely a whisper. I turned to find him gripping the kitchen counter, his weathered face going through about 6 different emotions in as many seconds. He looked older than he had this morning. Older than he'd looked in years, actually, which seemed impossible since he'd been aging in real time while I watched. "Yeah," I said quietly. "It's him." Dad moved toward the window like someone moving through water. I watched his jaw clench, watched his hands shake slightly. He wanted to be angry, I could see it. But there was something else there too, something that made my chest tighten with a fury I'd been carrying for 36 months. He wanted to be happy. Some part of him, the part that remembered when Marcus was 8 years old and thought Dad hung the moon, wanted to run out there and pull his son into a hug. "I should probably," Dad started, but I caught his arm. "Wait," I said. "Sweetheart, I don't think." "Just wait a second." I needed to think. My mind was spinning like a computer trying to process an impossible file. Marcus didn't get to just show up. He didn't get to waltz back into our lives in his luxury car wearing his expensive clothes, purchased with money that didn't belong to him, purchased while our mother was dying and I was there every single day, holding her hand, managing her medications, making impossible decisions. While I was planning her funeral, Marcus was apparently getting a tan somewhere. My cousin Mike appeared in the sliding glass door, grinning like an idiot. "Your brother's back. Come on, come celebrate." "Give us a minute," I said, not taking my eyes off Marcus through the window. He was hugging Uncle Richard now, laughing about something. Actually laughing. The sound made something inside me crack. You have to understand what those 3 years were like. Mom got sick fast, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you time to pretend it's not happening. One day she was fine, the next day she had 6 months to live. Then 3 months. Then weeks. And Marcus? Marcus left. He said he needed space to process. He said he couldn't handle watching her die. He said a lot of things through text messages that grew fewer and farther between until they stopped entirely. Meanwhile, I was wiping her forehead and administering pain medication and listening to her cry about all the things she wouldn't see, all the grandchildren she wouldn't meet. And when it came time to plan the funeral, to pay the funeral home, to sort through her belongings, to be the strong one for Dad, there was no Marcus. But there was the missing jewelry. Mom's diamonds, her wedding set, her grandmother's antique brooch, some pieces I'd been promised since childhood. Gone. And the emergency fund that Dad and Mom had painstakingly built over 40 years of working? The $15,000 that was supposed to be for emergencies? The police had filed a report. Detective Morrison had been very kind, very sympathetic, but ultimately clear. Without proof that Marcus had taken the items, without a clear chain of custody evidence or witnesses, they couldn't really pursue it. It came down to my word against the absence of his. And my family had been so kind about it. So understanding. So willing to believe that the items had maybe been misplaced, that maybe Marcus had just borrowed the money and would pay it back. "He's grieving too," Aunt Linda had said. "He's always been sensitive," Mom's best friend had offered. "I'm sure he'll come home when he's ready," Dad had said, that hopeful note in his voice even as I was liquidating my own savings to cover the funeral costs. And now here he was. Ready. I watched him through the glass door as he shook hands with my cousin Tom, laughed with my uncle, received the kind of warm reception that I'd been busting my ass to maintain for 3 years. Without recognition. Without gratitude. Without him. My phone was in my pocket. My hands were shaking. "You should go say hello to your brother," Dad said quietly, and there was pain in his voice, the kind of complicated pain that came from loving someone who'd hurt you, from missing someone who'd chosen to leave. I pulled my phone out. "Actually," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears, "I think I need to make a call." Dad turned to look at me, confusion crossing his face. "Sweetheart, what are you?" "There's something I should have done 3 years ago," I said. And I dialed the police non-emergency line. #Chunk2. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up, and each ring felt like an eternity stretching across the kitchen while Dad stared at me with dawning horror. "Non-emergency line, this is dispatch. What's your location and the nature of your call?" I moved away from the window, away from Dad, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Hi, yes, I need to report a theft. It occurred about 3 years ago, and the suspect is currently at my father's residence." "Ma'am, you're reporting a theft that happened 3 years ago?" The dispatcher's tone shifted immediately, less urgent, more bureaucratic. I could already feel the case slipping through my fingers like water. "Yes. The suspect is," I paused, hearing a burst of laughter from outside. Marcus's laugh. I'd forgotten how distinctive it was. "The suspect is my brother. He stole jewelry and money from my parents during their time of crisis. My mother was dying. She's since passed. And he. Is there an active threat at this location?" The dispatcher cut me off, and I realized this wasn't going to go the way I'd imagined it. "No, there's no active threat. He's here now, and I want to file a report. There was a police report filed 3 years ago. Detective Morrison was the officer." "Hold please." I was put on hold. Classical music, something by Debussy, maybe, filled the silence. Dad had moved to sit at the kitchen table, his face in his hands. I couldn't look at him. Sweetheart, he said quietly, his voice muffled. What are you doing? I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. Because the truth was, I wasn't entirely sure anymore. A few seconds ago, calling the police had felt like justice. It had felt like finally doing something about the massive, festering injustice of the past 3 years. It had felt righteous. Now it felt like something else. Something I couldn't quite name. The dispatcher came back on the line. Ma'am, I'm showing that Detective Morrison is no longer with our department. Do you have documentation of the original report? A case number? My stomach dropped. I'm not sure. I was listed as a witness, I think. Or the reporting party. It was 3 years ago. And you're calling to report this now because I'm angry. Because I've been carrying this alone. Because nobody believed me. Because he's out there drinking beer with my cousins like he didn't shatter our family. Because he's a thief, I said instead. He took approximately $15,000 in cash and valuable jewelry from my parents' home. Their emergency fund. My mother's diamond ring. And you have evidence of this? Did I? I had a mother who was dead. I had a father who'd been too heartbroken to press charges. I had a missing jewelry box and a depleted bank account and 3 years of festering resentment, but did I have evidence? Not physical evidence, but I know it was him. He left town right after, and he's never come back until today, and now he's showing up in an expensive car wearing expensive clothes. Ma'am, are you actually at your father's residence right now? Is this location safe? Yes, it's safe. It's my father's house. I'm at my father's house, and my brother just showed up. And you want to press charges for a theft from 3 years ago? Put like that, it sounded insane. I want to file a report, I said, my voice getting smaller. I want it documented. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the dispatcher deciding whether I was serious or wasting her time. Probably both. I can dispatch an officer to take a report, she said finally, with the tone of someone doing me a personal favor against their better judgment. But I want to be clear, for a case this old with no physical evidence, without the original investigating detective, and without cooperation from other family members, the likelihood of prosecution is very low. Okay, I whispered. Someone will be there within the hour. Can you confirm the address? I gave her the address. My father's address. The address where my mother had died, where I'd spent 3 years being the responsible one, where my brother was currently outside drinking beer and probably charming everyone with stories about his fabulous new life. I hung up. Dad was still sitting at the table, his shoulders hunched. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. He looked like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. You called the police on your brother, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Well, he's here. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? I turned to face him, and I could see the devastation on his face, but underneath it was something else. A question. A plea. Why would you do this to me? And suddenly I couldn't answer, because the honest answer was ugly and complicated and it had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with the fact that he'd gotten to leave and I hadn't. He'd gotten to run away from the pain, and I'd stayed. He'd gotten to escape into whatever version of life he'd built out there in the 3 years he'd been gone, and I'd been here, watching Dad age, watching him grieve, watching him hold on to hope that his son would come back. And now that Marcus was back, Dad wanted to forgive him. That was clear from the way he was looking at me, with disappointment, with pain, with something that looked uncomfortably like betrayal. He stole from us, I said. He stole from Mom while she was dying, and he stole from you, and he stole from me. I know what he did, Dad interrupted quietly. I've always known what he did. Your mother knew. We didn't press charges. We wanted him to come home. And now he has. So why does that make me the bad guy for wanting some kind of accountability? Dad looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the answer in his eyes before he even said it. Because he's still my son, Dad said. And you're about to have him arrested at my house, in front of all these people, and I don't think you've really thought about what that's going to do to any of us. Outside, through the window, I could see Marcus helping Uncle Richard flip burgers on the grill. He looked happy. Content. Like a man who'd never done anything wrong in his life. I could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. #chunk3. The sirens got closer, and I watched Dad's face go pale. He stood up from the table, moving to the window, and I could see him processing what was about to happen. In the backyard, nobody had noticed yet. They were too busy with their food, their laughter, their normal family barbecue where the prodigal son had returned and everyone was pretending the last 3 years hadn't happened. How long? Dad asked. She said within the hour. It's been, maybe 10 minutes? Jesus Christ. Dad ran his hand through his hair. You need to cancel this. Call them back right now and cancel. I can't do that. Yes, you can. You're an adult. You called them. You can call them back and tell them it was a mistake. The sirens were definitely closer now. I could hear them echoing off the buildings a few blocks over, getting louder with each passing second. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't quite get enough air. He committed a crime, I said, but my voice sounded weak, even to me. He stole from you. From Mom. He should face consequences for that. And who are you to decide that? Dad turned to look at me, and there was something fierce in his eyes that I'd never seen directed at me before. I'm the victim here. Your mother was the victim. And neither of us wanted this. I told you that. I never wanted charges pressed. I wanted my son to come home, and now you're... The sound of tires on gravel cut him off. A police car was turning into the driveway. Everything happened very fast after that, and also in slow motion. I watched Dad's face crumple. I heard the sound of the car door opening. I heard voices from the backyard suddenly going quiet, as if everyone had turned in unison toward the police car pulling up to the house. Oh my God, someone said. It might have been Aunt Patricia. I could see Marcus from where I stood at the kitchen window. He'd gone very still, a burger in one hand, a beer in the other, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker. Something that looked like recognition. Dad had already moved toward the door. Stay here, he said to me, but it wasn't an instruction. It was a plea. I didn't stay. I followed him outside, my legs moving without my permission, my body operating independently of my brain screaming protests that this was a terrible idea, that I'd made a terrible mistake, that I needed to stop this right now. The officer who'd emerged from the car was young, probably mid-30s, with a kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen a lot worse than a family barbecue gone wrong. There was a second officer still in the car, speaking into a radio. Is this the residence of Michael Chen? The first officer asked. I'm Michael, Dad said. This is my home. What's going on? The officer's eyes scanned the backyard, finding Marcus almost immediately, as if he'd been told what to look for. His expression didn't change, but something in his demeanor shifted into a more official kind of attention. We received a call reporting a theft at this address, the officer said. From approximately 3 years ago. A male suspect who may be present at this location? Everyone was staring now. Aunt Patricia had her hand over her mouth. Uncle Richard had set down the grill tongs. Cousins who I barely saw anymore were exchanging confused glances. And Marcus was watching the officer with an expression I couldn't quite read. This is ridiculous, Dad said. His voice was shaking. There's no theft. There's no crime. My daughter made a mistake calling you here. The officer's eyes moved from Dad to me. I could feel the weight of his gaze, assessing me, trying to figure out what kind of person calls the cops on their family. There's a report on file, I heard myself say. From 3 years ago. When my brother left town. Your brother left town, the officer repeated. Yes. With $15,000 in cash and my mother's jewelry. And you're reporting this now? I should have reported it then, but my father didn't want to. I didn't want charges pressed, Dad interrupted, his voice hard. I still don't. If you check the original report, you'll find I refuse to cooperate with any prosecution. That hasn't changed. The officer was clearly trying to figure out how to handle this. I could see it playing out across his face, the calculation of whether this was worth anyone's time, whether he was going to be able to make any actual progress on a case where the primary victim was actively refusing to cooperate. Marcus had set down his food and was walking toward us, his expression shifting from shock to something more controlled. He looked older than I remembered. There were lines around his eyes, a certain hardness to his jaw that hadn't been there before. What's this about? He asked. His voice was calm. Almost too calm. Are you Marcus Chen? The officer asked. I am. We received a report of a theft from this address approximately 3 years ago. You were identified as a possible suspect. Do you know anything about that? I watched Marcus's eyes move to me, and for a moment, something flickered across his face. Anger, maybe. Or pain. Or both. My sister's calling the cops on me, he said. It wasn't really a question. Your sister is reporting a theft, the officer said carefully. Can you tell me about this? No, Marcus said flatly. I'm not going to talk about anything without knowing what the actual accusation is. The officer pulled out a small notebook, and I realized with a surge of something, triumph? Horror? Regret, that this was actually happening. The police were actually here. They were actually going to arrest him. Except they weren't. Because Dad was shaking his head and saying, Officer, I need to be very clear about this. I am the property owner. I am the primary victim if there was a theft. And I am telling you that I do not want to press charges. I never did. My daughter called you without my permission and without my consent. The officer looked between Dad and me, and I could see him understanding the situation. This wasn't justice. This was family drama, and his department didn't have time for it. Is that correct? He asked Dad. You don't want to press charges? Dad's jaw was tight, his eyes closed as if he was in pain. That's correct, he said quietly. Then I'm not sure what you're asking us to do here, the officer said, looking at me. Without a complainant willing to cooperate, without physical evidence, and with a case this old, we don't have much to go on. The backyard was utterly silent. Even the sound of the traffic from the street seemed distant, muffled. I want to press charges, I said. I'm willing to testify. I saw him take the money. I saw him with the jewelry box. But I hadn't. I'd heard it from Dad. I'd seen the empty jewelry box. But I hadn't actually witnessed Marcus take anything. The officer looked at me with something that might have been pity. Without the owner of the property cooperating, he said, your testimony isn't going to be enough. Chunk 4. The officer's words hung in the air like a physical thing. Without the owner cooperating. Without the owner. My father, the person who was supposed to be my ally in this, who was supposed to understand what Marcus had done, who was supposed to support me, was standing there refusing to back me up. He took from Mom, I said, my voice cracking despite my effort to keep it steady. He took from her when she was dying. When she needed that money for her medical bills. When we didn't know if we could afford, I stopped, because I could feel the tears starting, and I refused to cry in front of the police officer and my entire extended family and Marcus, who was watching me with that unreadable expression. I understand this is emotional, the officer said, and there was genuine kindness in his voice, which somehow made it worse. But emotional harm isn't the same as a prosecutable theft, especially without cooperation from the primary victim. If your father wanted to press charges now, we could look into it. But I don't, Dad said. His voice was flat, final. The officer nodded slowly and closed his notebook. Then I think we're done here. I'm sorry to have wasted everyone's time. He looked at Marcus. You're free to go. Sorry about the hassle. The casual dismissal of it all, the way he said it like this was just a minor inconvenience, like my brother hadn't destroyed our family, hadn't taken everything from us when we were at our most vulnerable, made something crack open inside me. So that's it? I said. He just gets to come back here after 3 years and pretend nothing happened? He just walks away? The officer was already heading back to his car. That's a family matter, he said over his shoulder. Not really a police matter anymore. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and make him understand that this wasn't just a family matter, that justice wasn't being served, that my brother was a thief and a coward and a selfish piece of shit who'd abandoned us when we needed him most. But instead, I just stood there, watching him get into his cruiser, watching the other officer in the passenger seat give me a look that was somewhere between sympathetic and judgmental. Well, Aunt Patricia said from somewhere behind me, her voice oddly bright in the way it gets when people are trying to pretend something mortifying hasn't just happened. That was interesting. The police car backed out of the driveway. Within a few seconds, it was gone, the siren silent, the lights off, nothing but the sound of gravel crunching under the tires. It was like they'd never been there at all. Except they had been, and everyone had seen it. I turned to look at my family. At Uncle Richard, who'd picked up his grill tongs again and was turning meat over with more focus than anyone had ever given to hamburger patties in the history of mankind. At Aunt Patricia, whose hand had finally come away from her mouth but whose eyes were darting between me and Dad and Marcus like she was watching a tennis match made of pure family dysfunction. At my cousins, who were now actively pretending to be very absorbed in their paper plates and their conversations about nothing. And at Marcus, who was staring at me like he was trying to figure out who I was. I can explain, I said, and the words sounded absurd even as they came out of my mouth. Explain what? That I'd called the cops on my own brother? That I'd tried to have him arrested in front of our entire extended family? That I'd failed? Can you? Marcus said. His voice was still calm, but there was an edge to it now. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you just tried to have me arrested. You stole from us, I said. You stole from Mom. From Dad. From me. I did, Marcus said, and the admission was so unexpected that I actually took a step back. I took the money and the jewelry. I left. And I didn't come back for 3 years. You want to know why? I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Because I was ashamed, he said. Because I'd fucked up spectacularly, and I didn't know how to come home and face that. Because I was a drug addict, my stomach dropped. And I needed to get clean, and I needed to do that somewhere that wasn't here, somewhere that didn't have a house full of memories of Mom and Dad and you looking at me like I was a piece of shit. The backyard was completely silent now. Even Uncle Richard had stopped with the grill tongs. I've been sober for 2 years, Marcus continued. I've been working, I've been in therapy, I've been saving money. And yeah, maybe I should have come home sooner. Maybe I should have called. But I came back today because I finally felt like I could face it. Like I could face you. And the first thing that happens is you call the cops on me. Dad's face had gone pale. Marcus. No, Dad, let me finish, Marcus said. His voice was shaking now, but not with anger, with something rawer. I was going to tell you. I was going to tell all of you. I was going to explain where I went, what I was dealing with, and ask for your forgiveness. Not because I deserved it, but because I wanted my family back. And you, he looked at me, and I could see the hurt in his eyes, sharp and real. You decided I didn't deserve even that much. You decided I deserved to be arrested. You left us, I said, but my voice was small now, uncertain. You left us when Mom was dying. I know, Marcus said. I know, and I hate myself for it every single day. But punishing me now isn't going to bring her back. It's not going to fix anything. It's just going to make sure that I never trust any of you again. Dad looked at me, and I could see it in his face, the realization that I'd crossed a line. That I'd made a mistake. That in trying to get justice, I'd blown up what little chance we had at actually healing as a family. We should go, Aunt Patricia said quietly, already moving toward the coolers. Come on, kids. Let's help clean up. But nobody was really cleaning up. They were just leaving. The barbecue was over. The family reunion was dead. And it was my fault. #Chunk 5. I stood in the wreckage of the backyard, watching my extended family pack up their things like they couldn't get away fast enough. The potato salad Aunt Patricia had spent all morning making sat half-eaten on the picnic table. The hamburger patties Uncle Richard had been grilling were cooling on the warming rack. Even the decorative string lights we'd hung up the night before seemed to mock us with their cheerful glow. We'd turned them on early because Dad wanted it to feel festive, celebratory. What a fucking joke. Marcus had gone inside the house. I could see him through the kitchen window, talking to Dad in low, urgent tones. Dad's shoulders were hunched. He wasn't looking at Marcus. He wasn't looking at anything. You okay? A cousin, I think it was Jenny, or maybe Jennifer, one of those cousins whose name I always mixed up, touched my arm. She looked genuinely concerned, which somehow made it worse. Fine, I said. I'm fine. I wasn't fine. I was standing in my father's backyard, watching the carefully constructed facade of our family crumble, and I wasn't fine. Jennifer, whatever her name was, squeezed my arm and then let go, already turning away. There was nothing she could do for me. There was nothing anyone could do. I'd made sure of that. By 6 o'clock, the last of the family had left. My parents had loaded up the coolers into their cars, thanked everyone for coming like they were trying to salvage some sense of normalcy, and driven away in a caravan of minivans and SUVs. The only people left in the backyard were me, Dad, and Marcus. I'm going to my room, Marcus said, breaking the silence that had calcified over the last hour. He was looking at Dad, not at me. I need some time. Dad nodded. He still hadn't really looked at me since the police left. His face had taken on the same closed-off expression it had worn after Mom's funeral, that I'm shutting down emotionally and there's nothing you can do about it look that I'd come to know intimately over the past 3 years. You can take your old room, Dad said quietly. It's still, he paused, and I could see him struggling for words. It's still how you left it. Of course it was. Dad had never changed it. I'd asked him about it once, about a year after Marcus left, and he just shrugged and said he hadn't gotten around to it. I thought he was in denial about Marcus being gone. I thought it was unhealthy. Now, watching Dad shuffle toward the house like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour, I wondered if maybe I'd been wrong about a lot of things. I started picking up the trash, the paper plates with their half-eaten food, the plastic cups with their watered-down soda, the foil-wrapped hamburger buns that nobody had bothered with. My hands moved mechanically. There were so many things to clean up. There were always so many things to clean up. You didn't know, Dad said. I hadn't heard him come back outside. He was standing at the edge of the patio, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Didn't know what? I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. About the drugs. About why he left. Dad's voice was quiet, almost conversational, but there was something underneath it, something like grief, but angrier. You didn't know, and you didn't ask. You just assumed the worst. He stole from you, I said. I was still holding the trash bag, and I was gripping it so hard that my knuckles had gone white. He stole from Mom. How was I supposed to assume anything other than the worst? You could have asked, Dad said. Before you called the police. Before you humiliated him in front of everyone. You could have asked. I tried, I said, and there was an edge of hysteria creeping into my voice that I hated. I tried for 3 years to ask questions. I tried to figure out where he went, why he left. And you wouldn't tell me anything. You just said he needed space and that he'd come back when he was ready. Because that's what I believed, Dad said. And I was right. I turned to face him fully now, still clutching the trash bag. He left us alone, I said. He left you alone while you were grieving. He left me alone to handle all of Mom's things, to plan her funeral, to figure out what we could afford and what we couldn't. He left me to take care of you. I never asked you to do that, Dad said. You didn't have to ask, I snapped. You're my father. You were falling apart. Someone had to step up. And Marcus was falling apart too, Dad said. His voice was still quiet, but there was steel in it now. He was drowning, sweetheart. And instead of throwing him a rope, he threw himself off a cliff. And you didn't think to ask why. You didn't think to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more going on than just him being a selfish asshole. I didn't have an answer for that. My throat felt tight. I'm going to need you to leave, Dad said. The trash bag slipped from my fingers. What? Not forever, Dad said, and he sounded exhausted. But I think you should go home. Take some time. Think about what you've done. What I've done. My voice came out as a whisper. Dad. Your brother is trying to rebuild his life, Dad said. He's sober. He's working. He came home because he wanted to make amends. And the first thing you did was try to destroy him. I was trying to get justice, I said. For who? Dad asked. For your mother? She's gone, honey. For me? I don't want my son in prison. I want him home. I want my family back together. He paused. And I can't have that if you're going to keep trying to punish him for crimes he was already punishing himself for. I opened my mouth to argue, but there were no words. There was nothing I could say that would bridge this gap that had suddenly opened up between us. Dad was looking at me like I was someone he didn't recognize. Like I was the one who'd done something unforgivable. I'll go, I said finally. I'll go, but... Thank you, Dad said, and he turned back toward the house. I stood alone in the backyard, surrounded by the debris of the failed barbecue, and realized that I'd won nothing. I'd called the police on my brother, tried to have him arrested, and in doing so, I'd lost something far more important. I'd lost my father. #chunk6. The drive home took 40 minutes, and I spent every single one of them white-knuckling the steering wheel, replaying Dad's words on loop in my head like some kind of psychological torture device. Your brother is trying to rebuild his life. He's sober. He's working. He came home because he wanted to make amends. I'd gotten the story all wrong. Or at least, I'd gotten half of it wrong, which in hindsight might be worse than getting it completely wrong. If I'd been totally off base, I could have written it off as a misunderstanding. But this was the kind of wrongness that sits in your stomach like a stone. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it that morning, dishes in the sink, yesterday's mail still on the counter, the air stale from the AC being set too high. I threw my keys on the table, missing it, so they clattered to the floor, and sank onto the couch without bothering to turn on the lights. Marcus was an addict. Or had been an addict. The distinction felt important, and I hated myself for not knowing it. How long had he been struggling? Months? Years? Had it started before Mom got sick, or after? Had he stolen the money to feed a habit, or had the habit come from the desperation of dealing with our family falling apart? And how the hell had Dad known any of this without telling me? I pulled out my phone to call him, then immediately put it back down. What was I going to say? Sorry for calling the cops on your drug-addicted son, my bad for not asking enough questions. The apology felt too small for what I'd done, and I wasn't even sure Dad would take my call right now. Instead, I opened my laptop and did something I'd never done before. I searched for Marcus. Not on Facebook. I checked there 1,000 times over the years, and his account had stayed dormant. No new profile pictures, no status updates, nothing. This time, I searched more broadly. News articles. Court records. Anything public. It took me 20 minutes of digging, but I found it, a local news article from about 18 months ago. Local man completes rehab program, launches community support initiative. There was a photo of Marcus, older, thinner, with a cautious smile, standing next to a banner for some kind of recovery organization. The article talked about how he'd spent the last year and a half working with formerly incarcerated individuals and people struggling with addiction, helping them find employment and housing. 18 months. He'd been sober for at least 18 months. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend Keisha. How did the family thing go? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Don't want to talk about it. She immediately called. I let it go to voicemail. There were 3 voicemails waiting for me when I checked, one from Keisha, one from my Aunt Patricia, which I absolutely could not handle, and one from my coworker about a project deadline next week. I deleted them all without listening. By 9 o'clock, I convinced myself that I needed to do some damage control. Not for Marcus. I couldn't think about Marcus without feeling like my chest was going to cave in, but for myself. For the narrative. There had to be a way to explain this that didn't make me look like the villain in my own story. I opened my laptop again and started drafting an email to Dad. Then I deleted it. Started again. Deleted it again. What was the right thing to say here? That I was sorry? That I'd made a mistake? That I'd been so focused on being the responsible one, the one who held everything together, that I'd stopped seeing my brother as an actual person with actual problems? All of that was true, and all of it felt inadequate. By midnight, I'd refreshed my email about 50 times, hoping Dad had written to me. He hadn't. I checked my phone for texts. Nothing. I wasn't blocked, I could still see his status online, but he wasn't reaching out. I finally called him around 1 a.m., in that weird post-midnight space where decisions made don't quite feel like your own responsibility. He answered on the third ring, and his voice was foggy with sleep. Hello? Dad, I stopped. What was I doing? Calling him in the middle of the night to defend myself? To argue about who was right? I'm sorry. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing, shifting the phone. For what? He asked finally. For not knowing, I said. For not asking. For calling the police without. I trailed off. The full weight of it was hitting me now. For being so angry that I didn't stop to think about why he might have left. Sweetheart, Dad said, and his voice sounded tired in a way that suggested his tiredness wasn't new. It's late. We should talk about this when you're not. He's sober, Dad, I said. The words tumbled out in a rush. I looked him up. He's been helping people. He's been rebuilding his life, and I called the cops on him like he was still the same person who left 3 years ago. He was struggling, Dad said, and now his voice had a rawness to it that made my chest tighten. Your mother was sick. He couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle watching her die, and he couldn't handle his own grief, and instead of letting anyone help him, he ran. And I let him run because I thought he needed space to figure things out. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Why did you let me think he was just a thief? Why did you let me blame him for abandoning us? Because I was ashamed, Dad said simply. And because I didn't want to burden you with it. You were already doing so much. You were already holding up the whole family, and I didn't want to add my failure as a father on top of that. His failure as a father. The words hung between us across the phone line. I failed too, I said quietly. Yes, Dad said. But there's still time to fix it. I didn't know if that was true. I didn't know if showing up at their house and apologizing would undo the humiliation of being arrested in front of the entire extended family. I didn't know if Marcus would even want to see me, let alone forgive me. But I knew I had to try. I'll come by tomorrow, I said. And I'll apologize to Marcus. To both of you. That's good, Dad said. That's a start. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my apartment for a very long time, wondering how I'd managed to be so right about some things and so catastrophically wrong about others. #Chunk7. The next morning came too soon. I hadn't slept, I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through every possible version of what today might look like. In some scenarios, Marcus took one look at me and walked away without a word. In others, he let me speak and then told me exactly what he thought of me. In the worst ones, he listened to my apology and said it didn't matter, that the damage was already done. I showered for longer than necessary, changed clothes 3 times, and sat in my car in Dad's driveway for 15 minutes before actually getting out. The house looked the same as it always did, the lawn needed mowing, the porch railing had the same paint chip it's had for 6 months, Mom's rose garden had gone mostly to weeds. But everything felt different. The air felt heavier. The light seemed dimmer. Dad answered the door before I could knock. He looked like he hadn't slept either, and he pulled me into a hug that felt like forgiveness I didn't deserve. Over his shoulder, I could see into the living room where Marcus was sitting on the couch, his hands clasped between his knees, staring at the floor. I'll give you two some space, Dad said, though he lingered in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary before heading toward the kitchen. Marcus looked up when he heard me move into the room. His face was guarded, neutral in a way that suggested he'd prepared himself for this moment. He looked different than he had at the barbecue. Less polished. More real. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, and his hair was getting long enough that it fell across his forehead when he looked down again. Hi, I said. The word felt completely insufficient. Hi, he replied. I sat down in the armchair across from him, leaving the maximum distance between us that the room allowed. My hands were shaking, so I tucked them under my thighs. I owe you an apology, I started. Multiple apologies, actually. I owe Dad one too, but I'm starting with you because I stopped. The rehearsed speech I'd practiced all night was falling apart. Because what I did was unforgivable. Marcus didn't say anything. He was picking at a thread on his jeans, his jaw tight. I didn't know about your addiction, I continued. I didn't know you were struggling. And instead of asking, instead of trying to understand, I called the police. I got you arrested in front of everyone because I was angry and self-righteous, and I thought you owed me something for leaving. I did owe you something, Marcus said quietly. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much. I still do. No, you don't, I said. You needed help, and nobody gave it to you, and you did the best you could with that. I get that now. Marcus finally looked up at me, and his eyes were red-rimmed. Do you? He asked, and there was an edge to it. Because from where I'm sitting, you called the cops on me the moment I showed up trying to make things right. You didn't ask me why I left. You didn't ask me where I'd been. You just saw me and decided I was still the same person who stole Mom's jewelry. You're right, I said. Let me finish, he said, holding up a hand. I'm not saying that because I want you to apologize more. I'm saying it because... He rubbed his face. Because I need you to understand what you did. Not just that it was wrong, but why it hurt so much. The words landed like a punch. I'd been so focused on my own guilt, my own need to be absolved, that I hadn't thought much about his experience of it. The arrest. The handcuffs. The humiliation in front of the family who'd already written him off years ago. I spent 3 years trying to get clean, Marcus said. His voice got steadier as he talked, like he'd been waiting to say this, and now that he had the chance, the words came easier. 3 years of therapy and rehab and support groups, and still waking up some mornings wanting to use because it hurt less than feeling sober. And then I worked another 1.5 years just trying to prove to myself that I could stay clean, that I could do something good with my life. And I came back here to tell you all that, to tell you I was sorry, to try to make things right with Dad, to explain why I left, and before I could even get the words out, you decided I was still the villain. I was wrong, I said. I know I was wrong. Yeah, he said. You were. But that doesn't undo it. The cops didn't care that I'd been sober for 18 months. They didn't care that I volunteered 3 times a week at the recovery center. They saw the warrant and processed me like I was still the same addict who stole Mom's jewelry to get high. The shame of it washed over me again, but this time it was different. This time it wasn't about me and my guilt. It was about what I'd actually done to him. I didn't know, I said, and it sounded pathetic even to my own ears. I know you didn't, Marcus said. And I know Dad kept it from you because he didn't want to burden you. But that's the thing, you didn't want to know. You were so angry at me for leaving that you didn't want to hear any reason that might make it make sense. You just wanted to be right about me being a bad person. That's not fair, I said, and then immediately regretted it. Isn't it? Marcus asked. Because from where I'm standing, you had all the information you needed to figure out that something was wrong. You just didn't want to look for it. The accusation landed hard because there was truth in it. I'd been so determined to cast him as the villain, the prodigal son who'd abandoned us, stolen from us, left me with all the responsibility, that I'd never questioned whether there might be more to the story. So what now? I asked quietly. Can you forgive me? Marcus looked at me for a long moment, and I couldn't read his expression. I don't know, he said finally. That's the honest answer. I know I need to, for my own sobriety, for my own peace of mind. But knowing I need to do something and actually being able to do it are two different things. I nodded. It was more than I deserved. I'm going to take some time, he said. And maybe we can work towards something. But I can't just pretend this didn't happen. I can't pretend you didn't betray my trust right when I was trying to rebuild it. I understand, I said. He nodded, and we sat in that heavy silence for a while longer, the weight of 3 years of anger and misunderstanding hanging between us like a physical thing. Chunk 8, the long road. The silence stretched out so long I thought he might just get up and leave. I wouldn't have blamed him. I'd spent 3 years believing I was the victim in our story, and it had taken all of 5 minutes for him to systematically dismantle that narrative. The worst part was that he was right. Every single word of it was right, and I had no defense because I'd made my choices from a place of willful ignorance. I'm going to tell you something, Marcus said eventually, and I'm not telling you this to make you feel better. I'm telling you this because you need to hear it. I braced myself. When I left, I was scared, he continued. I was desperate, and I was terrified that you or Dad would figure it out and be disappointed in me. So I took the money and the jewelry and I ran, because running felt safer than staying and facing what I'd become. That was my choice, and it was a shitty one, and it hurt people I love. But it was my choice. It wasn't some character flaw that makes me inherently bad. It was a sick person making a desperate decision. He stood up and walked to the window, his hands shoved in his pockets. I spent the first year after I left thinking about killing myself, he said quietly. Not in any specific way, it wasn't like I had a plan. It was just this constant background noise in my head, this whisper that everyone would be better off if I just disappeared permanently instead of just showing up again when I finally got my head straight. My stomach dropped. I'd had no idea. The only thing that stopped me was knowing that would hurt Dad even worse, Marcus said. So I got myself into a program. Spent 6 months in inpatient treatment, which was basically the most humbling thing that ever happened to me. And then I started rebuilding. Slowly. One day at a time, the way they teach you. And somewhere in those 3 years, something shifted. I started actually believing I might be worth the effort. That maybe I could apologize to the people I'd hurt and actually mean it. That maybe I could do something good with my life instead of just not destroying it. He turned back to face me, and the anger had drained from his expression. What was left was something sadder, a kind of resigned understanding. The warrant didn't go away, he said. I knew it was still there. I knew the statute of limitations hadn't run out. But I also knew that I needed to come back here and face it because running again wasn't going to fix anything. I was prepared to turn myself in if I had to. I was prepared for consequences. What I wasn't prepared for was you making that choice for me before I'd even finished saying hello. I know, I whispered. And I'm so sorry. Marcus, Let me finish, he said gently. I need to say this. When they arrested me at the barbecue, when they put those handcuffs on me in front of Aunt Susan and Uncle Tom and all those cousins who'd already written me off as a fuck-up, something happened. Part of me wanted to give up. Part of me thought maybe you were right, maybe I was still just that person, maybe I should just accept it and stop fighting to be better. That's what addiction does, it tells you that you're not worth the effort, that everyone's better off without you, and when you're in that headspace and people confirm it for you, it's hard to argue. He sat back down on the couch, but closer to me this time. But I didn't give up, he said. And you know why? Because I'd spent enough time in recovery to know that feeling doesn't equal fact. Just because I felt like I was still the bad guy didn't mean I actually was. So I went through the legal process. I got a lawyer. I explained the situation, the addiction, the treatment, the 18 months of sobriety. And I got lucky. The judge saw that I'd done the work. I got probation instead of jail time. But it was close. If I hadn't had that support system in place, if I hadn't already done the work on myself, I could have ended up right back where I started. I felt tears sliding down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. So here's what I need you to understand, Marcus said, and his voice was firm now, certain in a way it hadn't been before. I'm not here for your forgiveness. I'm not here to make you feel like the good daughter who did everything right while the bad son was off being terrible. I'm here because I love Dad, and I love you, and I want to be part of this family again, but as a person, not as a redemption narrative. As someone who fucked up, paid a price, and is trying to do better. That's all I have to offer, and it's not enough to undo what happened. But it's real. He reached over and put his hand on my knee, and the simple touch of it broke something open inside me. I forgive you, he said, and I gasped because I hadn't thought he would, not really, not so soon. Not because what you did was okay, but because I need to. Because holding on to that anger, even justified anger, is a poison I can't afford to drink. I spent too many years poisoning myself already. I leaned forward and pressed my face into my hands, letting out something that was half sob, half laugh. I'm going to take some time before things are completely normal between us, he continued. We both need to figure out what our relationship looks like now. And you need to talk to Dad about some stuff, about how you've been carrying things that weren't yours to carry, about how he enabled some of my behavior by not telling you what was really going on. But we can work on that. I'm not giving up on this family, and I'm asking you not to give up either. When I finally looked up at him, I could see something I hadn't recognized before, hope. Not naive hope that everything would magically be fine, but the careful, hard-won hope of someone who'd learned to build things one brick at a time. Can we start over? I asked. Not pretending the past didn't happen, but just, starting from here? Marcus smiled, a real smile, small and tentative but genuine. Yeah, he said. I think we can do that. He squeezed my knee, and I reached down to squeeze his hand back. Through the doorway, I could see Dad's shadow in the kitchen, waiting. Not hovering, not interfering, just present, like he'd always been, like he would continue to be. It wasn't forgiveness that came easy. It wasn't a Hallmark movie moment of everything clicking into place. It was harder than that, and messier, and more real. But for the first time in 3 years, it felt like maybe we actually had a chance.